Good evening. I'm Chris Matthews in Washington. This afternoon in the White House press room, General John Kelly spoke to the country about how this country shows its respect for those who give their life for this country. Kelly told of the steps the military takes to preserve the body of those fallen, how it honors and respects the beloved ones of those who feel the loss most greatly.
Most Americans don't know what happens when we lose one of our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, or Coast Guardsmen in combat. So let me tell you what happens. Their buddies wrap them up in whatever passes as a shroud, puts them on a helicopter as a routine, and sends them home. Their first stop along the way is when they're packed in ice, typically at the airhead, and then they're flown to usually Europe.
General Kelly spoke in some detail, as you heard there, including an account of the words his fellow officers spoke in consoling him, John Kelly, on the loss of his son in combat. And those, he said today, were the words he advised President Trump to use in consoling the loved ones of the 4 soldiers lost in Niger, Africa, that their sons died doing what they'd signed up to do, to serve their country in harm's way. That the president's chief of staff took this duty upon himself today to take personal responsibility for the president's words to the widow of LaDavid Johnson dramatizes the heat that has arisen around this event and the politics it has exposed. The general said today that nothing is sacred today, not even the private words of consolation of a president to a Gold Star spouse. Let's listen.
But let me tell you what I tell them. And let me tell you what my best friend, Joe Dunford, told me, because he was my casualty officer. He said, Kel, he was doing exactly what he wanted to do when he was killed. He knew what he was getting into by joining that 1%. He knew what the possibilities were because we're at war. That's what the president tried to say to 4 families the other day. I was stunned when I came to work yesterday morning and brokenhearted at what I saw a member of Congress doing. It stuns me that a member of Congress would have listened in on that conversation. Absolutely stuns me.
Well, the congresswoman he mentioned, Frederica Wilson, said she listened into that phone call between the president and the family of the fallen soldier and described what she heard. It was an account backed up by the relatives of the soldier. Let's watch the congresswoman.
He was almost like joking. He said, well, I guess you knew something to the fact that he knew what he was getting into when he signed up, but I guess it hurts anyway. You know, just matter-of-factly. That this is what happens. She was in tears. She was in tears.
Well, I'm joined right now by Susan Page, Washington Bureau Chief for USA Today, Jason Johnson, politics editor at The Root, and Glenn Thrush, White House correspondent for the New York Times. Susan, you're first. And to me, I was overwhelmed by the general today. I think he looked like a president. He talked like a president. He talked like a guy who had lost his son in combat and knew what that meant and tried the best way he could do as chief of staff to this president who's unfamiliar with this whole world of combat and loss. And maybe human existence sometimes, I wonder about Trump. But he did his best to advise him on what words to use. He used those words, and he was crushed politically for doing so. Your thoughts?
You know, no one since President Trump was inaugurated has defended him more effectively than General Kelly did today. Because General Kelly has both the personal standing by virtue of his service and the service of his family, and also by his manner. His manner was completely matter-of-fact and totally compelling
and authentic.
And authentic. And so he did a lot for President Trump today in trying to explain what happened.
You know, Jason, I like the man's style because I was never in the military, but I will say this. He doesn't flap his arms around. He doesn't use these gesticulations that Trump used, like Jesus's and all those crazy gesticulations Trump does. He doesn't show off.
Right.
He's very calm, and he has a command presence like Colin Powell did or does.
Yeah.
And I thought what he said was authentic. He said, these are the words I recommend that the president use. He used them. Now, when he goes on to characterize the behavior of the congresswoman, that's politics. I accept that. He has a right to make that shot. But up until that point, I said, God, he was true to form.
Well, he's a good soldier, right? And it's his job to protect his boss like a good soldier does. But the problem is he could have stopped there. I do think it was a problem that he attacked a member of Congress. It's not just that there's a member of Congress there, but she knew LaDavid. She had mentored this guy since he was a kid, so she had every right to be there. I really think that weakened the beginning of his statement.
I think, right. Glenn, let's get to this news story, the news aspect of this. The fact that it took us till this afternoon, a story that I think some of the press was running pretty far ahead on. Around here, I think we were restrained last night, but there were some people racing pretty far ahead. And one of the papers today, not yours, was jumping on this as if one side was right and the other side was wrong, when this is one of those murky cases of tremendous emotions. The loss of a husband in this case, the loss of a son, is so horrible, especially in murky circumstances, in a war we didn't even know we were in. What are we doing in Niger? You know, when he gets knocked off in some sort of ambush, we go, my God, who was looking out for him? Lots of reasons for anger, not just grief. And then the president walked into it. Of course, he had to. This is an area that's so fraught with trouble, especially in the environment we're in right now, where everybody's on one side or the other. They're for or against this president. That's clear.
Well, there was so much to unpack in this one, Chris. First off, let's just get it out there. The main function of him coming out there was to say that the president essentially misspoke or articulated himself in a way that could be misunderstood. He gave the predicate by talking about Dunford in that incredibly moving passage of what the president probably intended to say. And in that instance, I thought that was extremely clarifying.
How did the president misstate what he was advised to say by the general?
Well, first of all, by the way, we have to say Kelly completely contradicted what Sarah Sanders said the day before and what Trump had said, that there was nothing to what had been said. Kelly gave you kind of the pre-translated version of what Trump had been expected to say. That
what
this
was
is
the differential?
Kind of thing
You got to help me here. What did Trump change from what he was advised to say by the general? Just help me here. I need the news.
Well, we don't know, but in the way that Kelly described talking to Trump, really putting Dunford's words into his own mouth so that Trump can understand the predicate. Essentially what he was saying is, you have signed up to do this at a time when many people in your country aren't. This was your job. You're surrounded by the greatest people on earth, and this is the potential price when you put yourself in that position. Trump, it appears, if we're just going by what the family said and what the Congresswoman said, did a shorthand version of that fell flat. That is not, by the way, an outlier. We've seen that a ton of times before. Donald
Trump,
it
be, how about giving some edge to the president? Could it be it fell on ears that weren't particularly receptive to the mouth of President
All of those things.
Trump.
I thought there was I still think there has been a tremendous rush to judgment on this. We've not gotten a clear sense of exactly what have happened. And Trump didn't help himself by saying he had proof in terms of a tape of the call. I think Kelly talking about that was exactly right. Yeah.
You know, Glenn and everybody, I remember, I immediately thought when I heard this the other day, because I'm a Churchill buff, when Churchill talked to Harry Hopkins, who was Roosevelt's top guy and a really great American, he had lost a son in combat. Yeah. So Churchill quoted from Shakespeare about your son has paid a soldier's debt. It sounds rough, but it is, in fact, the way it is. It's the horror of war. The young man or young woman walks into harm's way knowing that could happen. And that's what, for whatever good, great reason they had to go there, they did.
Right.
It isn't like they stumbled into something. I know what he was trying to say, but it is rough. The whole situation is rough. And I don't know if there is a nice way to say it, especially to your political enemy. As the Congresswoman is clearly, she has already accused him of being mentally unstable. She said he should be impeached. She's very clearly at the other end of the spectrum. Nothing wrong with that. A lot of my friends are. But that wasn't going to be a great conversation.
I got to be honest with you, Chris. Like, if you separate, and I thought this myself, if you separate the actual words from the president, if George Bush or Barack Obama had said this, we wouldn't think it was strange. But remember, this is a president known for his tone. This is a president known for occasionally shooting off the hip. So it's highly possible that he came off in a way, a lack of empathy on a regular basis. So it's perfectly reasonable for people to see it that way.
Well, here's General Kelly. He said he was stunned that a member of Congress, this is the political part, we're going to say that, would listen to the president's conversation with a grieving military family, something he said was sacred. But she was in the car when it happened. It wasn't like she called and put me on the party line or something, you know. Let's watch.
And I thought at least that was sacred. You know, when I was a kid growing up, a lot of things were sacred in our country. Women were sacred and looked upon with great honor. That's obviously not the case anymore, as we see from recent cases. Life, the dignity of life, was sacred. That's gone. Religion, that seems to be gone as well. Gold Star families, I think that left in the convention over the summer. But I just thought the selfless devotion that brings a man or woman to die on the battlefield. I just thought that that might be sacred.
Well, critics, of course, say how it was the president, of course, President Trump, who first politicized the issue of fallen soldiers by invoking President Obama. Let's watch what the president said just last week.
The traditional way, if you look at President Obama and other presidents, most of them didn't make calls. A lot of them didn't make calls. As far as other representatives, I don't know. I mean, you could ask General Kelly, did he get a call from Obama? You could ask other people. I don't know what Obama's policy was.
Well, look, guys, I thought the general, when he stayed within his position, in his lane, he was fantastic, talking about what it's like to lose a son, what the protocol is. He went through the icing of the bodies and all that. I mean, how can you beat that? That was so authentic. But this thing about the sacredness of women, I think of Trump. I think of Access Hollywood. I think of all of that. I think of Harvey Weinstein. I think of the whole thing that's going on right now. And I have to say, I thought that was a shot, a culture war shot that he didn't have to take in this case. First of all, the sacredness of women sounds like women up on a pedestal, these fragile little deers, you know, that old kind of thing, you know, the better half and all that old nonsense. It's harmless, you could say, unless you're fighting for equality.
Yeah.
And then you go, we don't need that. And also about choice and life, a little shot in the air. And I just thought it was a general cultural attack line against all the enemies of Trump.
I'm not sure women were treated so fantastically well in some previous golden era. We'll leave that. You know, here's what we could probably all agree on.
Don't put me in this box.
Yeah.
I know I'm trying to take your side of this. This fragile little deer thing isn't what people want to hear today.
That's exactly right. However, maybe we could all agree that the issue of Gold Star families, can't we get it out of this political debate? We've got a partisan debate about every single thing in this world. And maybe this is an area where both sides, the Congresswoman and the president, could take a step back.
DMZ, pull back. Thank you. Well said. I'm glad you said that. You always say the right thing. We're almost always. Thank you, Susan Page of USA Today. Jason Johnson, sir. Thank you. And Glenn Thrush. Glenn, you're tough. Coming up, the